Hello, boys and girls. Today we're going to be talking about comparing and ordering fractions, and we're going to use a number line to demonstrate how to do this. If you take a look at this example, the first piece that we're going to start with are labeling our benchmark fractions. If you remember from today's lesson or tomorrow's lesson, benchmark fractions are those pinpoints that we can use to help us order all fractional amounts. So if we take a look at this number line, I'm going to go ahead and start labeling my benchmark fractions. Again, why do I do this? I do this to help me order and to take a look at amounts of different fractional pieces. So all number lines, we start with 0. We go up to 1 whole. So that's the range that we're looking at for each fractional amount at this point. They're all between 0 and 1 whole. And all the fractional amounts that we talk about in this lesson are going to fall in between this range. At the very center, we're going to have 1/2. Those are our main benchmarks that we want to label. This is, again, going to help us order our fractional amounts. So if I want to label on this number line thirds, and I'm going to color code this for you so that you can kind of stay with me. Oh, and look at Mrs. Devaney and her grammar here. I'm going to label thirds. I'm going to label fourths. And I'm also going to label sixths. So again, just because I have halves already labeled on this number line doesn't mean I can't label other fractional amounts. The 0, 1/2, and 1 whole point are just going to help me label my thirds, fourths, and sixths. Again, we have to keep in mind that when we're labeling fractions, all fractional amounts are out of 1 whole. So we have to do some visualizing here. Between 0 and 1, when I'm labeling my thirds, I have to kind of erase the 1/2 in my mind, and I have to break up this number line into 3 equal parts, just like we would do if we were just labeling thirds. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So if I break up this number line into 3 equal parts, here would be my first part, my second part, and then my third part. So when I go ahead and label, I can label 1/3, 2/3, and then my 1 whole here would be 3/3. Now, if I wanted to do the same thing for fourths, I would do the exact same steps. I'm going to visualize this whole piece and how I would break this up into 4 equal parts. So again, my pieces are going to be a little bit smaller because I'm gaining more parts. So here would be my first part, my second part, my third part, and my fourth part. So when I go ahead to label my fourths, 1/4, 2/4, and you know what? Let's move this guy even over, or just a little bit more. 3/4, and then my 4/4 would be right there on my whole. When I go to label sixths, exact same process. I'm going to make sure that I'm visualizing my whole piece, my whole number line, into 6 equal parts. Again, sometimes it helps if you know your benchmark or you know your midpoint first. So if I'm thinking in terms of sixths, I know that half of 6 is 3. So I might go ahead and label my midpoint first. That might help me visualize each half into 3 equal parts. So I'm going to do 1/6, 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, 6/6. And then when I go ahead to label those, they might look something like this. And then there's my 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and 6/6 would be my whole. Now, why am I doing this? This gives you a visualization of where each fraction might fall on the number line when we have different denominators. So if you notice, I have fractions that are greater than and less than 1/2. I have fractions that are equal to 1/2. And we didn't do any multiplication or division to figure this out. We simply just looked at a number line, visualized how to break it into equal pieces, and then did that. So when we're comparing and ordering fractions, this is one way that we can use to help us order and compare different fractional amounts. Now, when we take a look at fractions, it's not always going to be as black and white as, 1/2 is equal to 2/4. Sometimes we're going to say, you know what? I don't know where that fraction goes. I know about where it might be placed, but I'm not quite sure exactly where. So we're going to use a strategy called cross multiplication to determine where the fraction should actually go on the number line. So I'm going to show you an example of that. So if I were looking at, let's say, the fraction 5/8, and I were looking at my number line, even though I didn't break up my number line into eighths just yet, I can tell where 5/8 would go just about by labeling some main benchmark points. So if I start over here, I know that at 0, I have 0/8. At 1 whole, I have 8/8. And half of 8 would be 4. So my benchmark in the middle would be 4/8. That helps me kind of visualize about where 5/8 would go. 5/8 would be somewhere in this section right here. Okay, now exactly where would 5/8 go? That's where cross multiplication is going to come in. So if I were comparing, let's say 2/3 right here and 5/8, I would want to use cross multiplication to compare the two. So here, and you guys can hear Tanner in the background, I'm sure. He's playing with the vacuum currently. I'm going to be using cross multiplication to determine exactly which one is larger. So here's how we're going to do that. We're going to cross multiply the numerator with the denominator and do the exact same thing over here, numerator with the denominator. Now, I'm going to write my products at the top of each fraction. So 8 times 2 is going to give me 16. 3 times 5 is going to give me 15. This 15 goes with the 5/8. This 16 goes with the 2/3. Now we're just looking at comparing numbers. Which number or which product is larger? Obviously the 16. That makes 2/3 larger than 5/8. So if I go back to my number line and I'm trying to plot where 5/8 would be, I know that 5/8 is going to be somewhere in here because I just did 2/3 cross multiplying by 5/8, and we found out that 2/3 is larger. So now, if I go back to my screen, let's say that I want 5/8 and 4/6. Let's get even closer. So now let's use some cross multiplication to see where 5/8 is going to go. If it's going to go before 4/6 or after 4/6. 8 times 4 is 32. 6 times 5 is 30. So which fraction is larger? 4/6, because 32 is larger than 30. So what this tells me is that this fraction of 5/8 is going to go before 4/6. So let's go back to our number line. 4/6 is larger than 5/8. So 5/8 is going to be right about here on my number line. Again, using cross multiplication gives us a better idea of where exactly my fractions are going to go if I can't see it visually on the number line. So let's try an example together. On your guided notes, example 1, which is labeled for you, it should be glued in your notebook at this point, we are going to order fractional amounts, and then we are going to plot 7/8 on the number line. And they tell us which fractional amounts they want us to plot. So let's take a look. We're going to do halves, thirds, fourths, and sixths again, just like we did in the first example. So you guys are going to do this one with me. Let's label our main benchmarks first. That's our 0, our half, and our 1 whole point. So go ahead on your number line and label with me. Go ahead and label 0. Go ahead and label 1 whole. And go ahead and label 1/2. Okay, now you guys can pick up a different color. I told you guys to bring multiple colors with you. You can pick up a different color to represent your halves. I'm going to use orange to represent my halves. And I kind of put it up here just so you guys can see. So I'm going to use orange to represent my halves. Okay. My halves are going to be right here, already labeled for me. My thirds, I'm going to label 1/3, 2/3. And then my fourths